Thank you very much.
Hello.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you, Daniel Garza-Zubiaga and ZsONAMACO. I will, first of all, apologize for having a conversation in English, or not really apologize because Megan is an English speaker, so for us to have a conversation, it has to be in English. Also to say that Megan is a really interesting curator that has many different facets to her practice. One of which, more recent one, is to be the director of the Underground Museum in LA. And she will today, the reason why we wanted to speak is not only for that reason, because that project is quite interesting and unusual, but also because we had the opportunity to work together on an exhibition, the Cities and Culture exhibition in the Santa Monica Museum in 2014. So we will be speaking a little bit of those topics. I'll just read to you the explanation or the description of this talk so that it allows us as a start, as a point of start. And then I will give the microphone to Megan to introduce. We will discuss exhibitions and artists that test the formal qualities and meaning of their art objects in order to situate them as part of a wider social movement and political event. How can we reimagine exhibitions as porous and malleable spaces where both objects and viewers escape the prescribed rituals of the art museum and its collections, relating instead to conditions beyond art? And this is a preoccupation that carries through both of our works, so I hope we have a very fruitful conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add also as well, thank you for inviting us to be here. Lucia and I talk a ton about not only our work but also our lives, and I think that we are both curators and directors of programs where we don't check our citizenship at the door, right? That we are deeply engaged not only in the artworks and exhibitions that we're putting forth, but really on the people that come to our exhibitions and the people that we are surrounded with every day and the people that make up the cities that we live in. So I think that these things are not separable. They're things that we are constantly thinking about when we're making the exhibitions that we work on and when we are directing the programs that we each separately direct. And I think that we're very much interested, at least through our conversations I can deduce, that there's this idea about art objects that they have the ability to expand beyond, say, their material confine, right? And that they really get to some very universal ideas that are important to us as humans. Love, hope, religion, land, relationships with other humans, and of course politics. And then we were thinking that art is a way to take all of these, let's call them non-material ideas, and translate them into material forms, right? And that art itself has this ability to, pull from the ether or this metaphysical plane all of these different aspects that make up the human condition, and then translate them into a form that we are able to mold and touch and experience in real time. So I think that if I can speak for both of us, the point here is not to come up with any answers necessarily of what art does, what art can do, what the power of art is, but maybe to present a lot of questions through the types of projects that we're engaged in, and maybe actually through the inquiry that we put forth, that all of us can kind of think through and be engaged as critical thinkers and people who are also questioning their experience of art, wherever we might be, right? I also have a note here that I thought it could do us some good to sit in these moments of uncertainty, because there's nothing that we can count on in life if not uncertainty, right? So, yeah. Oh, I'm going first. Yes, okay. Good. All right, so I am also, in addition to my curatorial practice, I am the director of the Underground Museum. The Underground Museum is a celebrated arts and culture space in Los Angeles, California, that was founded by two artists, Noah Davis, who unfortunately passed away in 2015, and his wife, Karan Davis. And the two of them envisioned the Underground Museum as a place where world-class art, the kind of art that we are all experiencing here today, could be brought to the inner city and specifically to underserved communities. They were very, very passionate about this idea that art cannot be something that happens over there for a privileged few, right? That art has to be something that is accessible and experienced by everyone. Noah also had this grand idea that he was going to partner with museums and with big galleries to bring this art to our neighborhood of Arlington Heights. And he went around and he asked a lot of curators and a lot of museums, can I borrow, this work and that work? And at the original time, everybody said no. And then he kept trying and trying. And fast forward to 2015, when he actually connected with Helen Molesworth, who is now the chief curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And Helen said yes. So now at the Underground Museum, we put on exhibitions that utilize the permanent collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art. And we do so through curatorial proposals that Noah created before he passed away. He created 18 exhibitions, so we have a lot of work to do to put these forth. And I should also say, going back to this idea of this kind of metaphysical plane, is that what we have for Noah's curatorial proposals are titles of each exhibition and then a list of works. But we actually don't have a curatorial concept for any of these. And so in that, let's say, blank space is where all of you, all of the audience members that come into the museum have the ability to make each exhibition exactly what they believe it is. And it's really a place of pure engagement with art ideas, art objects, and artists themselves. The exhibition that I want to bring up today, which is our second exhibition created with MoCA, is called Nonfiction. And loosely, the exhibition is about the history of the Black body as told through art. In the top row...
You have to click ahead.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so this is the exhibition. It's a very small exhibition. It's only 10 works. Features Theaster Gates, Henry Taylor, Dina Lawson, Kerry James Marshall, David Hammonds, Kara Walker, Robert Gober, and Miriam Palfy. The Kara Walker piece is, I should actually go back a second. What I think is really interesting about this exhibition and why it pertains to this idea of kind of the art object as the activator of social choreography is that the objects themselves on the surface are quite beautiful. And I think that people could walk into this exhibition and think that they were walking into a very classic exhibition of two-dimensional objects, paintings, photography, right? And that they could be quite wowed by the surface quality, and that actually they might think that even this exhibition was organized just for the surface qualities alone, colors and textures and whatnot. And it really isn't until you get right up close to the objects themselves that you begin to see that there is a relationship that's being demanded upon you that stretches way beyond the time and space of the actual gallery itself, right? That the politics of the works are very loaded. You might have to squint your eyes to see, but the Robert Gober wallpaper that is in the rear, this is actually a piece called Hanging Man, Sleeping Man, and it depicts a repeated pattern of a black man who has been lynched hanging from a tree next to a white man who is comfortably sleeping in his bed. And the work is, as Robert Gober calls it, a work of ultimate guilt, because you don't know if the white man is having a nightmare or the best dream of his life. There's also this idea that wallpaper itself hangs in the background of our lives, right? And how does racism hang in the background of our lives, almost like this, systematic experience, right? And that's actually the danger of it, some people might say, right? That systematicness, that its background, that its quietness, that it's always there, but that we are not addressing it is what makes it so dangerous to our lives. The small photograph that's hanging on top of the wallpaper is by a German-American photographer named Miriam Palfy, who is in line with, say, Diane Arbus or Dorothea Lange, in that she was very interested in going around the country and photographing injustices. The image in it is a wife, you can't see it, I don't think, it's too small, but it's a black and white image of a woman, and she is the wife of Caleb Hill, who is the first black man to have his lynching tried as a crime by the FBI. And that woman is staring with knowing pain over to the women that are depicted in Kara Walker's piece, which depict all of the atrocities that women had to face under slavery. And this piece actually, the one I'm talking about is the one on the left, is really, it's got this kind of continuous loop going to it, in that you see the woman on the left, she's suckling the master's child, and then her own child is being ripped from her. And then the woman who is trying to protect the child is having to step on the heads of people that were killed under slavery, and then only to see the child being captured by what you can maybe deduce is the young slave master that was being suckled at the beginning, now grown up to become a grown slave master. So this idea that the cycle of slavery is just continuous and unescapable. And so again, I really want to point to this idea that all of these works have this metaphysical character to them, right? That they're really pulling from historical experiences, but that also, because of their quiet nature, that they're forcing the viewer to engage in a relationship with that history, in a relationship with the politics, and to really understand their own place in that as well. And there's a haunting, I think, that happens wherein the viewer is not able to actually escape from this exhibition without being completely changed by the politics that are put forth in the history, that in the rawness of the history that is put forth. I think we can go on to some other ones, but
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions,
yes,
if I may. So we've talked about the Underground Museum. I've been there as well. There is a quality of the museum itself as an object. In other words, to me, in a sense, this idea that this storefront in an African American and Latino neighborhood in Los Angeles acts itself as a detonator of a certain type of social choreography, or seeks to do that. So there are two ideas that seem interesting here to me. One is that the museum becomes itself the object and has object-like qualities, in the sense that it is clearly discernible among other types of institutions. The museum is a collecting institution. The museum is a building. The museum hosts and holds and presents and cares for objects. The museum is also a social body, in the sense that it is both the gathering of, in the United States, a board of directors, curators, the people who care, and audiences. The museum is also a kind of economic nexus, because it's associated with literally with rich people, with people who have the means to have a museum. So I think what Noah did as an African American painter was to try to make us aware of the museum as an object, introduce it or insert it into this other context, in order for it to actually have these qualities that you speak of and assign to the object. A kind of mystical power of transformation, which of course I have some problems with, because I am both romantic but also horribly, horribly pragmatic. So sometimes when we're like all talking like the romance or the mystery of the art, I am like, oh, I can't deal with it very well. But I do think that in this case, there is something very interesting to be said about that analysis of this device.
I also think that what Noah did is he kind of appended a lot of the structures that you're talking about, right? So I think that actually one of the main differences between the Underground Museum and, say, a typical institution is that our role is not to conserve, collect, and protect artworks. Our role is to bring artworks out of storage and into relationship with people. And so I think from that very base construct of our museum, there's a different experience, right? There's no separation. There's no feeling that you as an audience member cannot be directly engaged. There's no feeling that Kara Walker that's sitting on the wall isn't actually there especially for you, because it actually is. And I think if we're talking about this idea of social choreography, that it's actually a very different one that is happening at the Underground Museum than is happening at typical museums, where I would say you would walk into a show and just maybe by the very nature of the cavernous space of a museum, right, or the very nature of alarm systems and security guards, that you're being told, you're being choreographed that these artworks are quote unquote not for you. therefore the future, or therefore rich people, or therefore, the collectors, or therefore the board. Whereas in our museum, that doesn't happen. None of those things are happening.
So how are you, the museum itself has a certain quality. The objects are a lot more approachable. They are right there. There isn't a guard telling you how you should function. What is your own bodily reaction? What's really dictating how your physical body interacts with things, the objects. Is there another aspect to this, what we in the field called horribly outreach or engagement or audience building? How do you address the communities around you?
It's actually incredible. We don't have to do anything. So we have a completely plain storefront space. People walk by our museum. They poke in. We have a bookstore in the front. They say, what's that? We are also free and open to the public, so we always say, come on in. And then we also have a beautiful garden in the rear space. And so by the time that people come into the bookstore through the museum, we lose them in the garden for 3 hours. And then without fail, the next day they will come back with their friends or with their parents or their grandparents, and it's really just been this beautiful, organic, natural, introduction to the neighborhood, literally person by person by person. The one piece of outreach that we do to specifically to our neighbors is that we create printed invitations for all of our events, because we don't want to pretend that anyone in our neighborhood is Googling Arlington Heights art and culture. Like, that just wouldn't come up. We are it for the neighborhood, and so we do printed invitations and we walk them around the neighborhood, and it's actually really fun because you get to meet all your neighbors. And there's Sonia, who lives on the balcony above the museum, who will always tell you that she doesn't need to come to our screenings because she can watch from her balcony. And Greg, who lives down the block. We've got tons of neighbors, and it actually is, again, it's just a one-on-one relationship building that we're doing.
Great. I have another question, but it's a leading question, and maybe it's not such a nice question, so we'll leave it for the end. So I will talk today about the Tania Bruguera project that I'm doing for the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, California. I have just opened on Friday my first exhibition at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. It's an artist, Bay Area practitioner artist, Lynn Hirschman Leeson, who has been historically under-recognized, and it's very, very much a pleasure and an honor to have worked with her on this. So I'm feeling very happy about it. And actually, Lynn's project launches 4 years of focus on the work of women artists, deep engagement, proper research, and focus really on the large galleries at YBCA, on doing more like monographic, retrospective, serious reviews of their work. But I wanted to bring up the Tania Bruguera project in terms of this notion of social choreography, because Tania Bruguera differs from the examples that we heard of just now, Megan mentioned, because Tania doesn't actually produce objects. She produces situations, she produces performances and actions. She distinguishes her practice into long-term actions and short-term actions, or projects. She hardly ever uses the term performance, but is known for works like Tatlin's Whisper 6, where in the context of the Havana Biennial a couple of years ago, I believe it's 2011. Sorry, my mind is not at its best. I'm a little tired. She basically staged this moment where the Cuban audience could take the role of Castro and stand on a stage with a dove on their shoulder, saying what they would hope to be the public sphere of Cuba to be, with cameras rolling. And it was an incredible gesture, because of course, as many of you know, when Castro first addressed the Cuban nation after the revolution, apparently, magically, mystically, a white dove landed on his right shoulder. So theater, the Cubans have known theater for a while. And so Tania reperformed that gesture, but now with a wider audience. So this is one example of a short-term action or project. The long-term projects of Tania Bruguera take place between 5 or 10 years. And sometimes they really, really lose their artness, not only their object quality, which as a performance artist, it's not something she's interested in, and in fact she does some of her practice as a critique of the limits of the object and its embeddedness in the art market, let's say. But when she's doing very long-term projects, the intention then is actually to take that mimetic quality of art, so that the representational quality, the fact that a thing looks like another, a cutout by Kara Walker looks like an image we have of a African-American woman enslaved and victimized. She takes that mimetic quality and transfers it to the systems and institutions under which we operate. The school, the newspaper, the political speech, the political rally. And in the long-term projects, she's attempted and done these different practices, these different approaches to, for example, the system of immigration reform or non-for-profit organizations that are working, and political organizations that are working for the rights of immigrants in the United States, so Immigrant Movement International, which started in 2006 and is continued, so that's a long time. Another project is Museo de Arte Útil, which you have on the screen, which is actually a 3 or 4 part project where she's worked with several institutions to do an archive of useful art, arte útil or art as a tool, which then gets deployed as a traveling exhibition, but also gets deployed as an archive online. And so in the exhibition that we are presenting, we are challenged with what is it that people are going to actually see when you have a process-based practice that seeks to disappear and become part of an actual system. What the hell are we going to show? So we have been working very hard, and this concept of social choreography comes up all the time, because Tania's projects only work if they actually activate a counter social choreography to that within which we are sort of operating on a normal life. If they give you a certain, either they shock you into a certain kind of behavior, or they give you a path out of a certain pattern of behavior, particularly in relation to the institutions that construct the systems around our life, and one of them being the museum. So we have galleries, the YBCA. We have 2 galleries and one weird, supposedly gallery, but it's very strange. And we are an art center. We are not a museum. We don't collect. We have a certain qualities and abilities that other institutions don't have for that reason, which is that we can be sort of, we don't have the aspects of collection that become the most operative aspects of the institution. And the YBCA, under the directorship of Deborah Cullinan, is actually working on figuring out how to become what she calls a citizen institution, an institution that is a platform for serious discussions and serious action, and civic action, actually policy action, which is why they hired me, because I think about these things. And so Tania is an interesting artist for us to work with because, first of all, she challenges us to kind of figure out how we as an institution need to do that. So, for example, there are 2 projects that all the projects in the exhibition, which are 11 projects, are to be updated. None of her projects can be presented only through the archive or the memory of the project. Each one needs to be updated in a different way, and they are done so through collaboration. Collaboration with Germen Studio, this design studio here in Mexico, collaboration with programmers in the United States who are creating video works and things like this, and collaboration with the institution, who then we in turn activate our institutional position in San Francisco to get things moving. So, for example, the Asociación de Arte Útil, Archive of Arte Útil, etc., is actually updated through this project, which is called the School of Useful Art, Escuela de Arte Útil, Escuela de Arte, the School of Art as a tool. And basically, half of the large gallery at YBCA will be transforming it into a working, inhabited school for college-level students, master students, through collaboration with SFAI, San Francisco Art Institute, California College of the Arts, San Francisco State, and Berkeley, and probably City College as well. So they're students. So basically, the way that this social choreography operated is that I went to talk to every one of those people and told them, we would like your students to be able to participate in this in the summer, in a very intensive summer program that is 4 days a week for 4 hours in the galleries, from 4 to 8 p.m. every night, except Fridays. There is a Friday party on Thursdays. And we want them to get credit for being there. We want them to not just do this because they are doing a summer program, but to actually get the credit that they would need in any other summer class. So part of this kind of articulating of the action or the activity or the kind of political agency of this particular work and these artists is to figure out how myself as a curator and my institution can interfere into the systems of education in the Bay Area. So it proves to be very interesting. People are very excited about it, but it also is a challenge because when people enter an art institution, their bodies essentially become, however passive or active, but you go into a different part of your brain and a different part of a use of your kind of physical, your physical presence in a space. In this case, we're actually going to have students inhabiting a third of it, together with other works that are represented as video works. Another piece, which is Immigrant Movement. Tania is really pushing us to start a party for immigrants, Partido del Pueblo Migrante, a second part of an exhibition or a project she did here at the Sala de Arte Público Siqueiros, which was Partido del Pueblo Migrante, and to pursue that really actively. As an art institution, we cannot do it because it's illegal for us to do it. So we're figuring out how to actually host the conversations with ACLU and others, which is to say that I hope I'm very fetishistic about how things look, so I hope the thing looks really good, at the very least, for God's sakes. And I hope that this experiment of having the school really challenges the regular audience, or the audience that comes to consume the work in a different way, or at least is curious to them, at the very least. Because it is a very kind of big question. It's our summer show. So it's the articulation of this notion of the social choreography and how these practices intervene or shifted. I'll be interested to learn what actually happens, aside from all the different negotiations and movement that has already happened in order to make this project happen.
I actually wanted to ask, so we've been talking about art objects, right, and social choreography, but it sounds to me like what you're working through a lot is the frame. Right, and that it actually has less to do with what happens inside that frame, but the frame itself. Right, the frame either becomes the school, the frame either becomes the institution. And I guess the question is that the way that you're thinking about this, right? And is there a curatorial push to create that frame prior to enacting these systems that Tania wants to get to, right? To like actually create some sort of a structure. I mean, the school being one structure, but really a curatorial structure from which you as an institution can go forth and create the connections with students, with schools, et cetera, because it seems to me like all of these, if you have different convening groups coming to work on one project together, they need, for social choreography to work, they need something to kind of wrap around themselves to say like, okay, we're all doing this thing together.
So one of the things I learned not only with Tania, but previously in the project that you and I worked together, is that a lot of these social practitioners, we are always concerned about the lack of formal qualities of what they produce, for many reasons. But in fact, that frame is in itself a form. So the institution as a frame, the fact that YVCA is an arts center, that's a frame. And also, both Tania and then we're going to talk together about Suzanne, are artists who are very conscious of the qualities of the frame or the characteristics, the institutional limits and the institutional forms, and that's what they actually work within. It's harder for their practice to do well in a situation such as this one, because it's very difficult to synthesize these kinds of processes in a way that doesn't reduce them to something that it's actually not their best. It's actually kind of hard for them to become. I mean, if I tell you all the many hours of discussion with all these schools, and I tell you that I don't think it's art what I'm doing. I think it's curatorial work, institutional relations, etc. But Tania thinks it's art. Tania calls it art, and she authors it, or she initiates it, as she calls it. So she sees herself as an initiator rather than an author, so that the object actually shaped as it goes through institutions. It's a different narrative.
And I think also, too, I would say you have your work cut out for you, because you cannot underestimate the struggle that it is to get people to come into an institution such as the YBCA. You have a very imposing building. It's located in a very imposing neighborhood in San Francisco, right? It's not actually a neighborhood I think that people would willingly come to, especially not to engage in a project like this, right?
And also the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts was built as a part of a redevelopment campaign, and it was extraordinarily contested. So people who used to inhabit the area, the Filipino and Latino communities, were displaced. They still remember. And also, it's very strangely constructed, so that our back is to the miracle of San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And so, but nevertheless, it's experiment, and since we have an audience problem anyway, so why not experiment?
It's not the most gentle segue, but let's just jump into it anyway. So Lucia and I both work with a really wonderful performance and media artist named Suzanne Lacey. And we met through our work with Suzanne Lacey. I, for many years, was Suzanne's studio curator, which meant that I was responsible for going into her archive and working with her to think through what is the object, right? So here we have this performance artist who's working in very large systems organizations, right? And working with many collaborators and working on projects that sometimes take up to 10 years to actually actuate themselves. And how do you go through 10 years of ephemera and memories and people and T-shirts and objects and stickers and flyers and fax notes and, you know, all the like, and say, okay, that's the work, right? So it's really, it's an archival exercise more than anything else, which is very exciting. And the piece that Lucia and I and Suzanne all did together for Lucia's exhibition, which you can talk a bit more about, was called No Blood, No Foul. And it was part of Suzanne's 10-year project called the Oakland Projects, which worked with youth in Oakland, California. And what Suzanne really wanted to do was to acknowledge authentically the lived experience of young people in Oakland, right? Not the experience that was being told about them through, you know, contemporary culture, through rap culture, through, you know, what you would see on the news, what made it to the news, but really like how they saw themselves. And a lot of the work that she did was media training with youth so that they could actually take the stories that were being told about them and reconstruct them themselves through many different media techniques like the news, but also through performance. And this particular project, which was about midway through it, was a basketball game that pitted youth against police officers. And it's the culmination of a very long series of workshops that Lacey had organized with her other collaborators that brought together young people and police officers to talk with each other about, you know, what they thought of each other and what their experience was, you know, when a police officer pulls up on the block and asks, you know, a group of young people to all put their hands in the air, like what that feels like for them, and what then vice versa the police officer feels like when he has to go into, you know, a group of young people and, you know, and they're all yelling profanities at them. And so, you know, it was not to say that either side was right or wrong, but that, you know, to really like at least get them sitting down and talking to each other. And then Through this project as well, Suzanne became very active in what was then, and now I think it's still called the Oakland Youth Policy. It might actually have a different title at the time now. But the policy was going to set aside a very large sum of money, up to $200,000 per year, for youth programs. And so there was this bill on the elections to say, should the city spend this money? So Lacey became very involved in how to get the community invested in this policy by bringing forth the youth that would be the beneficiaries of this policy to the forefront. And this basketball game was the ultimate culmination of that. And in addition to the game itself, you'll see in the middle section there were monitors all around the court, and those had recordings of council people and police officers and young people talking about their experience of living in Oakland. There also was a telephone where you could call in and record your thoughts about the youth policy and what your opinion of was it. She also was very, very careful to quote unquote change the rules of the game, which was what kind of, if you wanted to think of a big metaphor for the Oakland projects, right, like changing the rules of the game might be one of those. And she did that by saying, okay, well, first there's regular referees, and then in the second quarter youth became referees, and then in the third quarter the audience became the referees. And so it was a very, very participatory performance across the board. Fast forward to Lucia's exhibition. We had to figure out how this translated into an exhibition. So do you want to talk a little bit about citizen culture?
Thank you. Yes, so this exhibition gathered, I don't remember, 7 or 8 different projects by artists that looked at policies. Perdón? No? No. By 7 or 8 artists who had actually influenced or worked on policy issues specifically. This was a more complex one because it was also the longest in producing or in development. And it had several parts. And the work with Suzanne was very intense, but it was in the sense that sometimes as a curator, I want a lot of archives, for example. I want to bring out the art historical tools I have to deploy the archives in particular ways. But Suzanne is very clear that these projects have one moment. The moment of, they have several moments, one of which is the performance, but that the kind of reinstallation of them needs to be authoritatively produced. And I think she uses sometimes the concept of reinvestigation to think about how to select to present the work today. And so in this case, I think you and Megan and a designer in Megan and Suzanne and a designer in LA actually worked on the images, the diagram on the right that you see in the bottom image, which is the one at the end of the wall, which is a kind of mapping or history of the youth policy. It's not actually come all the way up to today, right? That chronology.
It's the entire project. So the banners, basically we wanted to create 2 sides to this installation, which then the audience stands in the middle of. So on the one side you have what was quote unquote the game, right? And what she's charting here is not only the entire history of the Oakland projects, her art piece, but also what was happening in contemporary culture, right? So it's really a telling of the work, her involvement, and then what was happening kind of in society writ large. And then on the other side, that 12-foot fence is meant to represent what you would see on a prison yard. And so it's, you're supposed to feel that there is this quote unquote, prison pipeline that all of the people that were participating in the game were also participants in, right? Whether they were youth who were being stopped by the police and being made to feel that, going to jail was going to be potentially a regular thing in their their life, or you were the police officers who were helping to funnel that prison pipeline. So, you know, going back to this idea of social choreography, it really was meant to position all of the viewers within these two opposing forces, right? So that you have the quote-unquote game on one side, but you have the very serious reality of what the game was meaning to address on the other side.
And I think that the effect of the piece also was very important, because at a certain point, Suzanne does want it to be an affect-driven experience. In other words, it's not so much about you can read the information if you have the time, if you want to, but you're supposed to, she would love you to have the feeling simply by being in the space, which is almost kind of an opposite of the process by which these projects come to be, in which relationships, or relationality as she calls it, the kind of exchanges, emotional exchanges, the loyalties to a number of people, and the different workshops, the workshop as a kind of means of artistic production as well, are so important to the understanding of a work, if a work is a process. For us, what became important, and really I don't think I did that much in terms of defining what the piece looked like in the space, but it was simply sort of setting it up to both have a kind of historical, not a historical qualities like these are historical documents, but a kind of narrative quality of the history of the project, while at the same time letting it have its own physical presence in the gallery. And that's one approach. In fact, right now, I'm working with a couple of other artists in another institution that I am not at liberty to discuss. It's a secret. But it's a very exciting secret. And we are working to do a retrospective of Suzanne Lacy that will be very comprehensive. And in February, we are convening a number of other curators who are working with process-based practices and performance and social practice, to help us to think about time, about both time as part of a project, how to translate or represent it in the art, in the exhibition space, but also relationality. How to give, particularly if when we present the Oakland projects again, there is a whole group of people who were part of it. So how to give them, how can this be also a platform for them to present their own ideas about this? And it's a tricky thing, because even though social practitioners are social practitioners, they are also authors. And they also want to control the way that this is presented. But I think we're running a little long. So do you have any other questions for me?
I would just actually say, like, on that topic of time, that time, I think, for all of these things that we're working through are really important, because this particular installation is a looking back, right? It's a looking back while hoping that you can also experience it in real time. And I think that when we get into the retrospective of Suzanne and thinking through, like, what is the value of the Oakland projects now, I think is going to be also really important too, right? And because I think that a lot of the politics that people like Suzanne, that people like Noah Davis, that people like Tania are working through, you know, they're not things that happen then. They're things that are continuous, right? And so our role as curators, our role as directors, is to make sure that the value of the lessons is something that we can engage in real time, right? And that how do we actually reinterpret these works so that people understand the politics that are happening right now, right? That this is not something that was, you know.